Mobile connectivity today is regarded as the key element for bringing social inclusiveness and all-round economic development. The government plans to provide mobile connectivity to 55,000 villages over the next 5 years. Universal access to mobile connectivity will explore probable paths for telecom operators, government and other stakeholders to develop an innovative value-for-money solution to achieve the dream of connecting rural India with affordable telecom and wireless internet.
Our next session today is on another pillar of Digital India. This one's called Universal Access to Mobile Connectivity. So please join me in welcoming the panelists. Milind Bengali, COO, Business Operations GTL Infrastructure. Rajan S. Matthews, Director General, Cellular Operators Association of India. Rajat Mukherjee, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, Idea Cellular Limited. Sandeep Malhotra, CEO and IFCO Kisan Sanchar Limited. I also request Bharat Bhargav, Partner Advisory Services, EY, to kindly moderate this panel discussion.
We are very fortunate to have such an eminent panel, and that too from across the telecom value chain. The telecom services industry in India is currently dominated by the wireless sector, and within wireless, the voice business. Of the 964 million telecom subscribers at the end of November 2014, 937 million were mobile subscribers. Of the 251 million internet subscribers, 233 million accessed it over wireless networks. The telecom services revenue at the end of 2013 was approximately 2,30,000 crores. Of this, 1,60,000 crores was from mobile business, and almost 80% of this revenue, about 1,30,000 crores, was voice revenue. While these numbers are large and very impressive, they don't tell us the complete story. The rural density is only 45% compared with 142% in urban areas. There are more than 42,000 rural villages that are still uncovered. 3G coverage is predominantly urban, and fixed line business doesn't exist in rural areas. So what are some of the factors that are affecting universal access to mobile connectivity? I'd like to start by asking Rajat, given the high levels of debt and the large payouts expected when the auctions start next month, is there really appetite for rural rollouts in the short term?
In the last 20 years that we have been in a relatively deregulated industry, the industry has gone from speed bump to speed bump and from policy change to policy change, but has nevertheless continued to grow. The reality of what you were mentioning, really, if you translate those numbers into and break them down, is that a very small percentage of the total 900 or thereabouts million people are on 3G. The rest are still on 2G. And therefore, the fundamental paradigm is likely to be just basic voice connectivity and based on a 2G kind of technology. So when you talk about going out into the rural areas, suddenly, if you provide them with voice connectivity, you're opening up the entire world to them. Whenever we have opened up new rural networks, our experience is that by and large, all the calls are incoming calls. And then to generate usage from that particular tower is a long drawn-out process of hand-holding those customers and encouraging them to use it and to pay for it, obviously. And we must remember that India has possibly the lowest airtime rate in the world. So even then, for a rural user, it is a challenge. So is there a business case, particularly in an environment where we are having to pay large sums of money up front for spectrum? It's difficult to say.
What about you, Rajan?
The industry is very keen to get broadband to quote-unquote the rural areas. But let me say this, it's not for a lack of demand, it's a lack of what we call effective demand backed up with purchasing power. The other thing in terms of a data point that needs to be understood is that the reason that we have the ability to maintain low tariffs is because of scope and scale. This is the whole paradigm of telecom. Now, if you ask us to go to a village which has 5,000 folks resident there, you both lose scale and scope. So the question is, then what happens? So also the other data point is that we have 20-year licenses. So none of us operators are in this for the short term. And if you look at our results, there are whole circles, that is states, that are truly on an aggregate basis still uneconomical. There's only a handful of states that really give us a profitable return. The critical issue is not voice, because I think voice we can manage, it's the data demand. And that's where the backhaul issue of no-fan and fiber and all of this comes in, because we expect that what the rural folks will demand and want is entertainment, all right, streaming video, things that were not demanded earlier on when we started rolling out. So given that movement, I think there's a need for partnership. And I think that's got to be the new dimensions of how we move in there. And government has a critical role to play in there. I think it's time that we basically incent the operators and basically say, if there are these 100 gram panchayats or villages or 150, 200, that you need to get there because it's national policy, then the government should basically say, we'll give you a reduction of 1% in the USO fund for every so many villages that you get to. Clearly, we need the support from the Facebooks and the Googles, because again, the buzz is already there, But by and large, it's going to ultimately have to be about partnerships going in there, and I think that's going to have to be the way we structure this.
My question to you, Milind, is that this must be really exciting for you. I'm sure there are challenges in operating rural networks, but there must be lots of opportunities with or without 3G and LTE. Why don't you share some of those with us?
Sure. Before I answer a question, Bharat, I look at it a little differently. Just by cable network moving out into semi-urban areas, there was a demand, there was the rural population, they have aspirations. That actually created the pull strategy. So possibly this point of time, we should give that much benefit of doubt to our rural population. If we give them the infrastructure, and the education, which is again part of one of the pillars, I'm sure the rural population will definitely come up with higher ARPUs, and income would grow through various business models. Now, to answer your question, Bharat, Digital India does present opportunities to tower company like ours. I'll touch upon 3 points. Point number 1 is, as I said, the mission to connect or spread network to 55,000 villages has a direct opportunity for tower companies. Point number 2, Bharat, is even because of increase in data usage, because of smartphone prices falling down, this also would mean increase in tower tenancies. The third point, Bharat, I would like to state is higher frequencies are being auctioned, and higher frequencies come, i.e. 1800, 2300 and now 2100. All these come with higher propagation losses. So for operators to maintain the same quality of service, you need larger number of cell sites. So for a telecom tower company like ours, GTEL Infrastructure, there would be higher tenancies coming in even in urban areas. Having said, I mean, these are the opportunities one looks at. There are definitely challenges and problems. In rural India, we face a huge problem of low power grid connectivity. If at all there is power connectivity, the quality of power is extremely bad. Second, the topography is to a large extent not easy to roll out, be it not just towers, but I'm sure backhaul with the operators will agree. And therefore, telecom infrastructure has not really moved out into rural areas. So how does one address this? I think what Rajan already touched upon is creating a commercial viable model. Possibly the government needs to relook at revenues from rural areas and look at that business model differently.
Given the low literacy rates, the demand is likely to be for video. How do we deal with it? Do we look at other access networks? Do we look at other services applications? Sandeep, what's your view? How will you simulate demand? What will convince the operators that the rural population will provide enough traffic and money for them to roll out networks?
I think it's a very fair thought that how would a rural India, where the per capita income is a fraction of what it is in the urban sector, is able to generate the same kind of ARPUs which the urban India generates. So what we do is we provide information riding the back of Airtel's telecom rural network and reach across to the farmers, to the poor, to the rural space through the IFCO's cooperative network. And based on that, we have today generated about 3 million plus subscribers, of which about 1.1 million listens to our 4 messages a day daily. And not only they listen to it, they wait for it and they actually act upon it. And these messages are generated based on a content team which is about 50 man strong. And of course, is language specific. It generates content on 10 languages. At this point in time, if the growth has to come in, it has to come in from a region which is penetration is only about 40-45% as against 100% plus in the urban sector. So I feel there is a strong business case. Yes, we need to involve government agencies. We need to get subsidized kind of network, whatever is possible. But the fact does remain, the rural masses of this country, that is 70% of the population, needs a reliable information network.
So, Rajat, there is somebody who feels very strongly that there is a business case. Are there opportunities for Wi-Fi? Hot zones?
Bharat, I think universal access is clear. I don't think there's any debate about that. I don't have any issues with the direction of the thought or the policy. And yes, you're absolutely right. Different types of technology will become enablers to connect them into the system. I think however, we are sort of taking a bit of a leap of faith here. We must understand that the people whom we are talking about are people who are walking into a communications and a connectivity environment for the very first time in their lives. Between all the operators in the country, about 80% of the country has been covered. There is no question about the fact that the penetration is low in the rural areas, but coverage exists. So let's not confuse the two. The question is, do we have A, large enough number of subscribers there? And B, do they have to use Rajan's very correct assumption, do they have the appetite, the economic appetite to be able to use non-voice? We want to be out there. But the realities are that we are there, but there is discussion around the possibility of a reduction in termination rates. Now, when I've just spelled out a situation where the first customers who come onto a tower are only receiving calls, it makes no sense for me to be there in that particular area. So, these are policy considerations which have to be understood, and that's where a certain amount of hand-holding from the government would certainly help.
Absolutely right. Rajan, you want to make a point?
Bharat, you raised a question of Wi-Fi. So just again, a couple of points on this. we will never have enough spectrum in this country to not do without Wi-Fi. So first of all, I think it's incumbent on us to recognize that the government ought to be technology neutral in terms of the use of spectrum, because technology is moving far too fast. The point that we raise is to respond to what was said here, the instance given of the cable operators. Well, hello, the cable operators weren't regulated till very recently. So yeah, you could put up these things on any tree and any pole and not have to pay anybody anything, and then your overhead was near marginal, right? Whereas we are in a very heavily regulated point. Now, take for example what happened in the backbone laying, which is today called NOFAN. We're all for laying the fiber optic backbone, which we think is necessary. But look at how it started. It starts with the government deciding that they need to do it. They use government entities to start laying the cable. When that runs into a problem, we create another entity called BBNL. And when BBNL can't do it, they create another entity called GUN. If you can figure out all the acronyms over here, good for you, all right? And then ultimately come back to the proposition that, oh, by the way, the reason why this is not progressing is because we haven't involved the private players adequately. So I think this is the thing that we need to address, is saying is that how do we play effectively between the government and us? What is the business of government? Let's invite anybody who wants to play. But let's, in a regulated environment, make sure that the regulated playing field is level.
Yes,
just a clarification to Rajan. I mean, the example which I gave of cable operators, I know they completely deregularized and there is no regulation. The point I wanted to make is, if the infrastructure goes there through government support, through PPP, through USO, through programs where you have a whole lot of operators get support, incentives, including what Rajat said, possibly the revenue share going down from 5% to 1%, what the industry has been asking for. With these kind of things rolled in, I'm sure there would be a business case. So the point I was making as an example is create the pull, create the demand, and create business by being digitally connected.
So we can look at deployments in Sweden, where multiple operators came together. So it's not only shared passive, it's shared active and possibly shared frequencies as well. So you can share spectrum as well, and in those designated areas, everybody shares that infrastructure, and that makes it viable. But that's something for perhaps Rajan and the industry to look at.
Sweden has a per operator spectrum allocation in excess of 45 megahertz.
Yes.
Right? And what do we have in India? Let me see if I can break it down for you. Approximately what, 700 megahertz out there? 700 megahertz, divide that by 22 circles. How much does that work out to? And then you have 80% of the traffic on only 3 networks. And you have a 6 network or a 7 network operation. So again, how many operators and how many customers are sitting where? So we are completely, we've lost the game as far as spectrum is concerned. And so many times it's been mentioned that the amount of spectrum which exists in the world is exactly the same, whether it is in Sweden, India, a little old island, Madagascar, has exactly the same amount of spectrum. You just have to manage it right.
But if I could again, in terms of this model that we're discussing, if you look at the demographics, right, given the increasing productivity of our rural areas, more youth are leaving our rural areas to come into our urban areas. Yes. So the problem is not necessarily saying, hey, let's continue when the demographics and everything else is moving in a different direction. I think we have an additional issue with regard to national development, where we're saying is that you've got to decongest your cities. You've got to decongest the networks in terms of saying, let's build out our roads, let's build out our infrastructure, let's get these city areas spread so that we can use our spectrum more efficiently, as opposed to saying, well, let's just go and hit every gram panchayat, when you know the long-term demographics are not in your favor as a sustained plan.
You're absolutely right. It's not only about networks going out, it's also about roads being built out and infrastructure being built out in rural areas. Now, Sandeep, to you, is m-banking, wallets, financial services, are these things going to play a role in creating, generating demand in rural areas?
I think definitely they are going to be, but one has to understand the, you know, the psyche of a rural guy. He's more consumption oriented. He's a subsistence oriented. Whatever he earns, he's spending almost 90-95% of that. So where does the banking come in? So this is where we need to develop applications, need to develop something which actually binds him together to have a deep engagement with us. So what do? You offer him healthcare, you mentioned. That's a great example. Yes, you can do it, but of course you need bandwidth, etc. Tele-doctor, etc. is not going to happen easily. You know, you don't have those kind of scheme. Education, great idea, ad, you know, it's a lovely ad, you know, no question about that. But the fact doesn't mean how much, you know, penetration you can have with that because the network not being there. The key issue is that how do we deliver it at a fraction of a cost, not causing pain to the operator, yet being more meaningful to the guy, and that's how we devised voice messages with a trail to say that if you have more queries on this, please call back on this number.
The message seems to be clear. New operating models, new business models, cheaper inputs, relevant applications, and we're ready to go.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.